Geronimo, his given name was Goyacla, one who yawns, but he later earned the nickname of Geronimo that has since become synonymous with battle. Geronimo was born near the headwaters of the Gila River in what is today New Mexico, sometimes around 1829. He was the grandson of a chief and a member of one of 4 bands of the Chiricahua Apache, the Bedonkohoi. Up until the 16th century, the Chiricahua homeland had stretched across 6 million hectares, or 15 million acres, in the US Southwest. But all that changed after Spain conquered Mexico and extended its domain well north into Apache territory. By the time Geronimo was born, the Apache had been fighting Spanish troops for more than a century. At 17, he was admitted to be the band's war council and joined raids against Mexico. A turning point came in 1858 when he and his band traveled to conduct trade in Casa Verde, Arizona, still held by Mexico at that time. They left their women and children camped outside of town under guard. When they returned from their business, they found Mexicans had attacked and killed nearly everyone in camp, including Geronimo's wife and 3 children. I could not call back my loved ones. I could not bring back the dead Apaches, but I could rejoice in revenge, he later said in a dictated autobiography. Geronimo joined forces with 3 other Apache bands to march deeper into Mexico, where they captured, killed, and scalped in retaliation. James Polk was elected America's 11th president in 1845. He believed in the concept of manifest destiny, that it was God's will to expand the United States as far as the Pacific Ocean. America had already annexed Texas, and Mexico had claimed everything to the west and refused to sell it to the US. So the US declared war and won all or part of what is now the western states, including the Apache homelands. Settlers began pouring into the region, sparking waves of sometimes brutal attacks by Apaches and earning them the reputation of bloodthirsty savages. By 1872, the Chiricahua realized that they were fighting a losing battle. Their leader, Cochise, negotiated a peace agreement with the United States government, by which he agreed to stop fighting and move his followers to a reservation in their home territory. But the government reneged on the agreement 2 years later and forced several thousand Apaches to a reservation at San Carlos, Arizona, a barren place that US troops called Hell's 40 Acres. Outraged, Geronimo and a group of followers escaped. He would elude the army for a decade, hiding out in the mountains or slipping back and forth over the border with Mexico. All the while, newspapers and magazines across the country roused audiences with tales of bloodthirsty insurgent, vague on details but terrifying nonetheless. In 1884, the government detailed an astonishing 5,000 troops to capture Geronimo and his band, aided by hundreds of Apache allies and volunteer militia. Geronimo, worn out from the chase, finally surrendered in late 1886. The army promised Geronimo he would not be executed, but rather would be exiled for 2 years and then allowed to rejoin his family in Arizona. As it turned out, Geronimo would remain a prisoner of war for life. One of the conditions of the surrender was that the free Chiricahua Apaches would see their family upon arrival in Florida. President Cleveland, however, was still expecting an unconditional surrender. Unbeknownst to the Chiricahua, Miles had decided that since Geronimo had broken all of his prior conditions of surrender, all terms agreed upon were now null. The US government never intended to allow the Apache to see their families when they got to Florida. Geronimo and his band were taken to Fort Bowie, where Geronimo drank from Apache Springs one last time. It was at this site that he fought next to Chief Cochise 24 years prior to the Battle of Apache Pass. Geronimo was now 65 years old. He took his last steps on his native land and entered a train car, for the first time in his life bound to Florida. The US government had rid itself of the Apache problem once and for all. On a train ride out to Florida, Geronimo's band was afraid they would be killed at any moment. Upon arriving, Geronimo and his band were not reunited with their families at Fort Marion as promised. Instead, they were taken to Fort Pickens. They would not reunite with their families for over 2 years, breaking Miles' terms of surrender. Many Chiricahua died of malaria while in confinement. A daughter was born to Geronimo while in confinement, though he would not find out until later. The first group of Chiricahua Apache who had been moved to Florida were dwindling due to malaria. They were moved to Mount Vernon in Alabama as prisoners of war. It was an unfamiliar landscape to them, in the tall trees instead of open desert plains. Their children were sent to school in Pennsylvania to learn Christianity, English, and other aspects of American lifestyle. Many of these children caught tuberculosis and died. Chiricahua parents back in Alabama began to hide their children so they wouldn't be taken away. After 2 years of imprisonment in Florida, Geronimo and his band were moved to Alabama and were finally allowed to see their families once again. General Crook visited Chiricahua in Mount Vernon. By this time he had lost all respect for Geronimo and did not meet with him. Crook instead met with the other leaders of the Chiricahua. Crook publicly condemned the schools in Pennsylvania. He also suggested that the Chiricahua be sent to live at Fort Sill Reservation in Oklahoma, which would be a more familiar environment to them. Crook died 2 months later. When the Chiricahua moved to Oklahoma, there were only 119 left. After 8 years being prisoner of war, it was the first time in 8 years that they could once again hear the coyote howl and collect their prized mesquite beans. Geronimo, once known as the worst Indian of all time, had become one of, if not the most famous. His already impressive deeds had been exaggerated again and again all around the country and the world. He toured the nation performing for fairs and exhibitions such as the Buffalo Bill Sideshow. He sold little trinkets such as buttons from his coat, which he could replace. Geronimo even rode in Teddy Roosevelt's presidential election parade. It has been said that more people turned out to see Geronimo than Roosevelt himself. Geronimo asked the president if he and his people could return to the Southwest, but Roosevelt refused, saying there was still too much hate for Chiricahua in the Southwest. At the urging of settlers, Geronimo attempted to learn Christianity in his old age. He struggled, however, under Christian principles to forgive himself for all the killing he committed, especially children. An artist once visited Geronimo to paint him. and the painter stated that Geronimo had revealed his bullet wound to him and said that there were over 50. "Bullets cannot kill me," Geronimo said, and they did not. In 1909, Geronimo was returning from a printing bench one night when he fell off his horse into a ditch. He stayed in the ditch until morning and contracted pneumonia. Before he died, Geronimo stated that he never should have surrendered, but instead should have died fighting. He passed away days later. In 1913, after 27 years of imprisonment, the Chiricahua were finally set free and were no longer prisoners of war. 1/3 opted to stay at Fort Sill, while 2/3 moved to the Mescalero Apache Reservation in New Mexico. At the time of Chief Cochise, the Chiricahua Apache had numbered 1,200. At the end of the war in 1886, they numbered 500. By their release, they numbered only 261. Here is a picture of Geronimo kneeled with his rifle. After his family massacred, Geronimo would wear his hair short for the rest of his life. It was a sign of mourning among Chiricahua Apache. Here is a scene in Geronimo's camp before surrendering to General Crook on March 27, 1886. Geronimo and Natchez mounted, and Geronimo's son standing at side holding a baby. This is a picture of Geronimo, his son, and two picked braves. This is a scene in Geronimo's camp before surrendering to General Crook on March 27, 1886. This is a scene in Geronimo's camp, again before surrendering to General Crook in 1886. This is a group in Natchez camp and boys with rifles. This is a picture with Geronimo in the center on top of a hill with his warriors. Geronimo and his warriors in the Sierra Madre of Mexico. This photograph was taken in 1886 before Geronimo surrendered to General Crook on March 27. These pictures show a campsite in woods with General Crook, Geronimo, Captain Roberts, Nana, Lieutenant Mouse, Captain Burke, and 3 interpreters and other Apache Indians. This picture shows the council between General Crook and Geronimo, summary at his camp in the Sierra Madre at Canon de los Embudos in Mexico on March 25, 1886. It's showing Chihuahua, prisoner of war, Calle, and Geronimo. This is a picture of Geronimo, front row, third from right, and his Chiricahua followers as prisoners of war en route to Florida in 1886. This is a scene in Geronimo's camp before surrendering to General Crook on March 27, 1886. This is a picture of Geronimo full length, seated, with two nieces standing at his side. This is a picture of Geronimo and 7 other Apache men, women and a boy, posed in front of tents at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis 1904. Here you see Geronimo and 2 other men posed standing full length at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. Here is Geronimo was among 5 chiefs invited to ride in President Theodore Roosevelt's 1905 inaugural parade. This is Geronimo sitting on a chair with a bow and arrow in 1904. This is a picture of Geronimo, whom General Miles named the human tiger.